Hello, all my friends. So, tonight's topic is quite a bit heavier than what we normally do, but it's also important. It's something I personally have been thinking about for a while, and just maybe not from this perspective, but then when I was asking on my TikTok what topics people wanted to see, one suggestion was combating depression as Lokean. So I figured that's something we'll talk about because it does need addressed. I'm going to start by saying that is a very loaded topic. There are baked potatoes at a steakhouse that are less loaded than that. But, so first of all, depression is something I personally deal with. I know a lot of people who do. And no, I don't mean as in we live in a depressing time and, a lot of people are depressed frequently, but because of society and economy and whatnot, but like people who actually have depression, as in a diagnosis, the disease of depression, and it's a disease, it's a mental disorder. Um, then put that on top of the other things that the normal people are even suffering depression symptoms for, it can be a heavy, heavy burden. And especially when it's people who are called to some form of spiritual work to help others, because then there's an added weight. Not that any of us just won't do it, but it does add to it, and then it becomes this snowball thing. So it is an important issue, and looking at it from the perspective of Lokean and Loki himself, uh, I hadn't really thought about it in that terminology, but I can see how that would be helpful. So we're going to take a crack at it. One of the things people deal with, for starters, Loki has been very well known for calling people who are outcasts, neurodivergent, disabled, LGBTQ plus, what have you. Loki is a lover of outcasts. Loki is one who tends to call people who have depression and people who are downtrodden, people who have been abused, people who have been through traumas of some kind. He has a soft spot for us. Okay? I personally think that he and the Jotun as a whole, they tend to call people like us because they understand. They themselves were outcasts. They themselves were looked at as terrible and treated lesser than, if not completely unneeded, simply because of what they are. So they get it, and they have this sympathy for us, I believe. But again, they also are very strong. And we are. We are. Some of us are strong just being here now. Some of us could have very well not have been. And the Jotun, they push through. And you look at Ragnarok from emotional perspective, I've said for a long time that it seems almost like the underdogs finally took their shot. And I think they call us, again, this is all UPG tonight, okay guys? But I feel like they call to us because not only they understand, but they want to help us along that path. They want to help us grow in our strength. And when they talk about growing in our strength. It's not, whereas, Odin has his hall, and you're talking about like strength of fighting and strength of, Thor's actual physical strength. But our strength and our resolve and our inner strength is something the Jotun are really good at dealing with and helping us to find. And that leads to combating as Lokean. There's a couple of things I think could help. I've been working on them, just didn't think of it from the Loki perspective until now that's kind of what I'm doing. And now I'm going to work on it even more. But one thing we all know with Loki, well, in general, most Lokians tend to agree that his number one rule is self-truth. And part of that includes accepting that we have depression, accepting when we are disabled, accepting there are things we can't do like so-called normal people, and also accepting that that is okay and that is part of who we are. So looking at the inner truth and looking at our personal truth and truth as a whole, I think can help alleviate some of the stress and the strain that comes with it, because we have a big issue, most of us who deal with depression, disability, physical or mental, emotional, whatever. We get in this case where we live in a society that tells us we have to constantly be productive, and we have to make money, and we have to do all these things that really, in human history, is kind of a new thing. We had to survive. We had to get food and shelter and things like that. But the making money and the being productive pretty much was limited to make sure you have what you need to stay alive. And the rest was pretty much taken care of, unless you were attacked by, someone and you had to defend your homeland for a minute. But as a whole, human species was not meant to be build, create. Create, you create for enjoyment. We weren't built to be constantly productive. We weren't built to have an hour or two with our family before we go to sleep and get up and go to work in the morning. That's not how we were. We are social creatures, and we're all so busy now that we rarely have time to socialize, even with the people that live with us. But yet we are very social animals. I mean, that's a scientific fact. Other animals are social. We now know this. Crows are social. Rats are social. But we've taken that away from ourselves. And so in looking at Loki's truth, we can look at the fact that no, it's not what society likes to hear. But we're just not built that way. And that's okay. And that's who we are. And we can do things. And yes, we need to survive. But it's okay that that's not who we are as far as being productive. And the other problem we get into with that is when we have depression, when we have disabilities of any kind, we have things that stop us from doing things that normal people would. And it doesn't matter whether it's going out walking, going shopping, cleaning your house, whatever these things are, and especially those who have physical disability or both physical disabilities and depression, etc. What ends up happening a lot of times is we'll sit through it, and there are days we can't do it. We can't get up and do it. I can remember times when I would clean my house crawling on my hands and knees because it hurt less to do it that way than it would to stand up and walk around and do it. But an interesting thing with that is I also found out later that when things started looking better and emotionally I started getting a little better, I was able to do a little bit more. Now, I'm not saying disability's in your head. It is not. My neck is still as crooked as ever. It's more so now, to be honest. But I had a very dear friend of mine explain to me one time that, yes, I do still have that disability, but when I left behind a lot of my crap, a literal weight came off my shoulders. So it did help. I still can't do things a lot of people my age would do. I can't. But I can do more than I used to because of that. So part of the inner truth is also looking at whether or not we've just completely can't do anything at all, or whether we have gotten to that point where we can't make ourselves do it anymore. Because thanks to society being like it is, whether we intentionally do it or not, there is a self-sabotage that happens with us. Because we can't do what they claim we're supposed to be able to do. And then because that's ingrained so deeply in the way we were raised, we get this guilt over it. And then that guilt becomes more depression, which then makes the physical pains worse, which then makes us sit longer to where things just begin to pile and pile and pile. And I saw a post online once, and then there was an article that went with it that was actually not meaning in like an ableist way, like, yeah, just go do it, but in the sense of sometimes we have to, say, in the post it was describing like dishes being done. And you've got a whole sink full of dishes and you can't get the energy or the physical ability to do the whole sink of dishes. So you know what? Do one dish. And that's still one less you have to do tomorrow. And then the next day, do maybe 2 dishes. And work into it. It got me thinking about, like, physical therapy. We have a tendency, I know, I personally have done it, where we get so weighed down, and I was so weighed down, that I would just not even want to try. But then, like I said, shit happened where I had to try. I had to do something because it was starting to affect not only my household and my life and those living with me, but it was also affecting me by making me even more depressed, to where I was spiraling because I couldn't do these things that I thought like I had to do. So we look at the truth of that, and we look at the fact that, yes, these are things that need to be done. And it goes along with the other one is shadow work. Not shadow work in the sense of, that deep-seated stuff, although that can help too. But doing this, at least inner reflection. For me, that helps. Why am I feeling this way? Am I literally just, I cannot do the thing? Or am I feeling so guilty and depressed over not being able to do it because of society's crap that I'm just not trying? And again, it could be either or. Some days it's one, some days it's the other. So there has to, like, doing some shadow work, doing some inner reflection can help with that as well. Um, but when you're going and doing, um, hell, sometimes you got to do it out of spite. And that's a very low-key thing to do. You know? So if you look at it and you do figure out that maybe I can do the one dish scenario, next day do two, next day do three. Not literally next day, but you know what I mean. It's a process. It's kind of like physical therapy. If you're a pitcher for the ball team and your shoulder's messed up, the physical therapist does not make you go out and start throwing strikes first day. They'll have you lift your shoulder a little. And then, after a while, they'll have you lift it higher. And then they'll have you go through the motion and go as far as you can and stop. As far as you can and stop until finally you are able to throw the ball. And even then, you're not going to throw it as far. And you can't let yourself get down on the fact that you can't throw as far and fast as you used to yet. But it's a process. And going through the process, and that's where, for me, the inner truth and shadow comes in. Because I know me personally, I will have days where I'll tell myself I just can't. I just fucking can't. But then later, I feel bad that I didn't do it. So then I feel more bad because it's been so much time since I should have done it. And it spirals and it goes down to where I'm breaking down crying. And then I have to look at it. It still has to be done. And with me, a lot of times it'll be like homework or cleaning up the house. Things like that. And I'll let it get even bigger because I've spent so much time feeling bad that I didn't do it the first day that I was supposed to. Or feeling bad that I didn't do it all in one day. So look at the truth, and the truth is, it doesn't have to be the way society says. It just has to be the way of progression. It just has to be the way of surviving and getting through the way that you best can. It doesn't have to be all at once. It doesn't have to be a fully spotless house. It can be like that scenario, one dish. So we have to look at that. And for me, I will eventually sit down and start on it. And then I'll go, I'm just going to do this much here. And then that gets the flow going enough that eventually I go, okay, now I'm going to do this much. And progress until it is done. Again, this is just me, my perspective. I can't speak for Loki or for you. But with the spite, that's a very Loki thing. And sometimes we have to tell ourselves, I'm going to do it just to show everyone, including myself, I fucking can. Because sometimes that's... kicking our own ass is sometimes the only way that we ever make ourselves do anything. Especially some of us who are very close to Loki. And if we don't, he'll do it for us eventually. So we might as well kick our own butts. So we do the inner truth. We do the... call it shadow work. It can help if it's deep stuff. Because sometimes it's triggered by deeper things. But the main point is getting to that point of, am I totally depressed, down, unable to do, or am I getting more depressed because I didn't do on top of what was already depressing me and now snowballed? So once we figure that out, then we can figure out how to work with it. And then here comes your spite. Because we do have people that will look at you and be like, oh, you're lying. You just don't want to do it. And sometimes we'll have to, excuse me, stand up and be like, no, I'm not lying, but I'm also not lying down. Because now I have to get up and do it just to show myself I can and to show you that you're an asshole and a prick. Like, I mean, that's, sometimes we have to. And sometimes, for a lot of us, especially those of us whose depression and things relate to trauma and abuse and toxic people and relations, sometimes doing that and making it out of spite can help with the depression, because now when we get up and we come out of it, then is when we can look and be like, prove that asshole wrong. And then we get an extra, like, boost because we proved the bad guys wrong. I do that quite a bit, actually, now. There's a lot of times that I'll push to succeed just because I know it'll piss off my enemies. That's my thing. And then, finally, one thing that I do think is super important is if we're being honest with ourselves, and if we're doing the inner reflection, and we're doing the best that we can to push through and get through, there's no shame in admitting that we've struggled or that we are struggling. There's no shame in admitting that we're struggling bad enough that we can't do it yet, but we know that we should. There's no shame in admitting anything, really. And that's where frith comes in. That's where turning to your kin comes in. Because another part of the depression is it tells us that no one's going to want to hear us. No one's going to want to listen. No one's going to want to help. We're so accepting of the so-called fact that people are just going to not help, not believe us, not want to be there for us, or going to hate us, whatever our anxieties are telling us, that we won't reach out. We won't reach out. And now, I'm not saying others should not pop in and check on us when they know we have issues. It's a two-way street. But at the same time, when we've not shown any indication that there's something might be wrong, when we pull back and still pretend everything's okay, I know a lot of people, myself included, will continue to go on and post on social and laugh and joke and do all the things that make it look like we're okay, to hide it because we don't want anyone to know, because our anxieties are telling us that we're bad if we do, or that people might look at us funny if we do, or whatever the case. And we refuse to tell anyone what's really going on with us. We refuse to rely on our kin. But here's the thing. As Lokean, as Rokatru, really as heathen of any kind, your kin is supposed to be there for you and you there for them. And I had a dear friend once mention the fact that, sometimes when we're the lean post, we don't have a lean post for ourselves. And I know a lot of us sometimes won't even ask for one. because we don't want to be a burden to anyone else. We don't want to not be, and it's not that we don't want to be honest. It's just a lot of times we care so much about our kin and our tribes and our families that we don't want to burden them by letting them know we need help. And we also don't want to, primarily, we don't want them to think that if they need us, we can't be there for them, because it's important to us to be there for them. So that cycle starts. But if we are keeping with heathen, Lokean, pagan ways, we're supposed to be relying on each other. We're supposed to be, again, as Lokean, we're supposed to be honest with ourselves so we can be honest with others. So we can figure out why we're not being honest and then go work through it. Slowly crawling if necessary, like on the ground, one finger at a time, crawling if we have to. But we have to be honest with ourselves and with others. Yes, be honest with yourself when you do not have the spoons to deal with other people and to help them. Because then it's not going to be as much help. I've taken so long, I'm still working on that. If I'm down and my spoons are gone, I have to make myself be like, I honestly can't right now, because I will not be as good a help. And that was even more of an issue for me, because I had to admit that I couldn't be the help that I wanted to be. So it's still like an extra pain for us doing it, just to admit that we don't have the spoons. But when people do reach out, how you doing? And they ask, be honest. Let yourself be honest with your people, especially your kin. I have gotten to where I know I need to rely on my people. Just like they can rely on me, there's nothing wrong with me relying on them. There's nothing wrong with me asking for help. Some of you more so than others. There are some people that are very, very close to me that have been, they've dealt with my crap for a long time. So, but it's okay to be honest when we need that. It's okay to ask for kinship from those we give kinship to. That's the main point. I know for me, I have people that when I am down, you are there for me. And it is appreciated. But at the same time, keeping with Frith and kin, when you're down, I'm there for you. It's a give and take, like everything else. And we shouldn't be ashamed to admit when we're on which side of the giving and needing. That's part of truth, which is Loki. Even if we are writhing in pain and that's the only reason that your chains are shaking, we've got to admit it, or it won't get better. So, that's my take on it. from a Loki perspective, Roku true even. Be honest with yourself about what you can and cannot do. Do the shadow work or inner reflection needed to discern whether it is totally can't or whether we're just spiraling further, letting it pile up. So we can, and then figure out where it's coming from. That's part of shadow work and inner work, is finding out what is stirring in here to make these things get so down, so that we can address them and work with them and do the physical therapy. And remember your spite. Spite is an okay reason to keep going. Sometimes that's all we've got. Go for it. And most importantly, remember your kin. Remember your spiritual tribes. Remember your friends and family who are there for you. And don't be ashamed or afraid to let them know what you need, what's going on. If you need help, if you can't help them at the moment. Because what is frith without honesty? And they love you. If they really love you, they'll understand. They may even offer to help. And you should probably let them, if possible. But that, my perspective, how to deal with these things. Again, you can apply it to whichever way you want. Any path, it's applicable. But from a Loki perspective, these are all things that he likes us to work with anyway. Truth, kin, shadow work, and spite. That is the Loki way. So, hope y'all have a good night. And I will see you soon with a happier topic next time.